you. Education critics' contention that the use of calculators in math classes will undermine students' knowledge of the rationale underlying calculation procedures is clearly false. Well, that's strong. But we're saying like, so here we're saying like this is like the education critics concession, or like why they're against the use of calculators is because they think it's going to undermine our rationale. But we're saying that critic is clearly false. And I'm like, okay, well, why is that false? Every new information handling technology has produced virtually the same accusation, okay, because it's always happened. At least one Greek philosopher, for example, believed that the advent of written language would erode people's capacity to remember information and speak extemporaneously. All right, so what is our conclusion?
So for this one, in all honesty, I was really confused finding the conclusion here.
So where do you think like the author's opinion really comes in of what they're trying to convince us of?
I feel like you're trying to convince us that the first thing that well, I guess there's two things. The first one that I would think is that every new information handling technology has proven virtually the same accusation. But I was like,
whatever it says produced virtually the same accusation. What is the same accusation?
The same accusation that that technology undermines students' knowledge.
Yes. So is that a fact or is that an opinion?
I would feel that this would be what we have to go with everything is true, so that would be a fact, wouldn't it?
Yeah, like he's not trying to prove to us this sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is just something like he's just saying like, hey, like every like, and that makes sense. Like every information in the past has had the same accusation made against it. Like he's using this as a fact. Okay.
And then my second one would be that when he says the prior sentence that is clearly false.
Yes, that's where his opinion is, right? Where we say like the education critics' contention that this is clearly false. So we're saying that the education critics' thoughts is clearly false because every new technology has had the same accusation. And then we give another example of a technology being used, because we even say, for example, like, so here's an example of it not being the case.
Okay, that makes sense then. Yeah, that's why it would be.
Yeah. So we're trying to prove why this education, we're trying to prove why we think the use of these calculators is false, is because everybody has had the same accusation. And whenever we talk about written language, I guess we're assuming that we can still remember information and we can still speak extemporaneously, even though we can write.
Okay, that makes sense now.
So what kind of question is this?
The reason that I went is, so I feel like this is it could be incorrect, but a weakened question.
Kind of. So it says the reasoning in the argument above is most vulnerable to criticism. So I would consider this more of a flaw, but if you treated it like a weaken, it wouldn't necessarily, you probably could get to the right answer by treating it like a weaken, because if you point out the flaw, you're weakening the argument, right?
Yeah.
Does that make, okay.
Yep, that makes sense.
So what do you think is the flaw or the gap here? Like, why doesn't the education critics have to be false?
I feel like the flaw is that just because some students aren't being undermined by the calculators doesn't mean. I guess the flaw is that there could be some students that are being undermined by calculators.
True. But think more about why this support about language isn't a good enough reason for it.
Well, because language and mathematics are two different subjects.
Yeah, like they could be different. And I'm also thinking like, just because every new technology, my other flaw here is they're saying every new technology has had the same like accusation. Well, they just give us one example where maybe the accusation wasn't true. couldn't
Yeah.
there be 100 examples of where a new technology does do this?
Hmm. Yes.
Okay, so let's go into this and ask ourselves for each answer choice, does this happen and is it a problem?
Okay. A, presents only evidence whose relevancy to the issue raised by the opponents has not been established. Presents only evidence whose relevancy to the issue raised by that person has not been established. So I didn't necessarily like this one. I don't know. I don't believe that this is happening. Presents only evidence. Wait.
I
Hold
don't
on.
hate this one, because I think that like, I don't know, I guess, like, I guess this is relevant maybe, but
Mhm.
I don't think they've really shown why this written language thing is relevant. So I would personally probably leave this one open, but I wouldn't love it. Because essentially what we're saying is like we're using evidence that we haven't shown why it's relevant. And I kind of like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Is that where it comes in? Because the second part is the part that I kind of don't like. This is raised by the opponents has not
Oh,
been
sorry, I have even
established.
okay, sorry. Prevents only evidence to the issue raised by the opponents has not sorry. Presents only evidence whose relevancy to the issue raised oh, raised by the opponents. Um, that's what we're saying is clearly false. So this honestly doesn't even matter.
Okay.
Because it's like they're referring to the issue raised by the opponents. That's just wordy to say like essentially what we're that the claim that we're saying is false.
Okay, that makes sense
Only
now.
evidence whose relevancy to the issue has not been established.
Okay. Then B, draws a conclusion based on an ambiguous notion of knowledge. So this is what is this, 18? So this is the initial one that I went with.
Okay, so what kind of flaw is this?
So this is a draws a conclusion. Oh, I wrote this flaw down.
Or what does this mean? I don't care if you don't know the name, but what does this mean?
So basically what it's doing is it means that more than one meaning for the
For a word,
word.
right? And so like if I said, oh, I had a really good example the other day. Oh, I had this meme and it's like this picture of these construction workers and the boss is like, I told you to raise the roof and they're like dancing, but he meant like the roof. Like that is like there's two different meanings being applied there. Like that's an ambiguous term. And so like,
Oh,
we don't take one word here and then use it differently somewhere else.
okay, that makes more sense. I think that my initial thought going into it was well, the reason I think why I went with B is because when they say the notion of knowledge and they say knowledge in regards to calculations and knowledge in regards to written language, I thought that that was
Okay, but does the word knowledge itself mean two different things?
I don't believe no, it doesn't.
If we were talking about like information, right? Or
Yeah,
wisdom or um I don't know another synonymous word for knowledge, but
I
like
know what you mean.
yeah.
Okay, okay, that makes sense why B is wrong then. Then C takes for granted that the advantages offered by new information handling technologies always outweigh the disadvantages. So I didn't like C that much because I felt like it was too strong when it said always outweighs the disadvantages.
Yeah. And what does takes for granted mean?
That we kind of undervalue it.
We assume.
I would assume. Okay.
So do we assume that the advantages offered by new tech always like I love how you picked up on that always outweighs the disadvantages? No. We're
Mhm.
just saying in particular to this specific example. So that was great to cross that off.
Then D takes a condition that suffices to prove its conclusion to be a condition necessary for the truth of that conclusion. So for D, in all honesty, every time I come up towards like an answer like this, I always get confused. I don't really know how to approach
Okay.
them properly.
Okay, we'll go into this. I have a couple of these that we can look at.
Okay,
So it
perfect.
says takes a thing or takes a claim that is enough to guarantee a conclusion, to be a condition that's necessary for the conclusion. So this is conditional reasoning, and we don't have that going on in our stimulus at all. So what
Okay.
this looks like is if you so if I said like if you have $1 million, you will be happy. Jermaine does not have $1 million. Therefore, he's not happy. So in my argument here, I'm flawed because I take while having $1 million is sufficient to be happy, I act as if it's necessary because I say if you don't have it, you're not happy. But couldn't there be other ways that you were happy?
Yes.
So that's what D would look like at an answer.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense now.
But we'll look at a couple of those because those are tricky.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Then
And E.
concludes that a hypothesis is false simply because it contradicts other beliefs held by the advocates of that hypothesis. So this one, I don't even believe I went with this one, but essentially this is saying that concludes that hypothesis is false, so that the hypothesis that the use of calculators undermines students' knowledge is false, simply because it contradicts other beliefs held by the advocates of that hypothesis.
So who are the advocates of that hypothesis?
So the only other advocates I assume would be the Greek philosophers.
No, who is the advocates that the use of calculators in math class will undermine students' knowledge?
Oh, educational critics.
Yes. So do we conclude that that hypothesis is false because this claim contradicts with other beliefs held by these educational critics?
No, because
We don't even know what their other beliefs are.
It's just presenting one type of belief.
Yeah, so I think I would go back and go with A on this one. Because I'm thinking like this support here, like we haven't shown why this learning of a language is relevant.
So presents only evidence whose relevancy to the issue has not been. Okay, that makes sense. Because when they did bring in some Greek philosophers, it just seemed
What does that
totally
have
left
to do with
field.
anything?
Yeah. Okay, now I see why A is kind of is like the best of the answer choices. Has not been established.
Yeah, that's the only one that I can see why it works. Where the other ones, I'm like, I don't even see how any other ones could possibly work.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. Especially like how we just narrowed them down. A seems a lot more strong. Like, yeah, a lot more solid.
This is called a faulty analogy.
Faulty analogy.
Not that you have to memorize or anything, but this is what what happens. The flaw happens to be.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense now.